Hi, this is Greg Berman, and I am here with Rob Martin, the owner of Mercury Brewery in Ipswich, Massachusetts. How's it going?
Doing well, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us today and let us ask you a few questions.
Absolutely.
First of all, how long have you owned the brewery?
I've owned the brewery since 1999. I started working at the brewery in 1995.
Oh, wow. Were you working full-time at the brewery, or was that in 95?
I started working full-time in June of 95. Prior to that, starting in January of 95, I was a volunteer. I was coming in on Saturdays, Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, and really doing about 3/4 of the brewing that was being done here.
Okay, so you were actually one of the first people to brew here, and when you bought it in 1999, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, how did that come about?
In 1998, we had a reasonable year, but not a great year. And right around Thanksgiving time, all of a sudden, the owners of the brewery at the time let everybody go. Everybody was sent packing except me. I had a particular skill set, which was one, the ability to brew.
Mm-hmm.
Two, I have a CDL driver's license, so I could drive a delivery truck, and I had been their driver at one point in time, and I knew how to run the bottling line. So I could do everything that was involved in producing beer for the brewery. When everybody was let go, I was retained to try and keep things going as well as they could. And when that happened, I pulled out an old business plan that I had for a brewery and retooled it using the information that I had learned over the prior few years, and presented that to the current owners and solicited a buyout of what they had.
So when you first started, I'm going to guess that there were some challenges when you first bought the place that you didn't expect. What kind of things did you run into?
Well, one of the things we ran into was when I bought the facility with my investors, we ended up buying a facility. We didn't buy the Ipswich Ale brand. The Ipswich Ale brand was purchased by a company called U.S. Beverage, and they ultimately had the rights to it. We did contract brewing of about half of Ipswich Ale. So one of the big challenges was...
Where was the rest of it?
The rest of it was being made in Baltimore at Clipper City Brewing Company.
Did you have any control over that? Or?
We had no control over that because the new brand owner, U.S. Beverage, they maintained all that control. And what they did was they played us against them to keep driving the price down. And driving the price down and driving the price down. So that was a big challenge for us because it was a majority of our production. And they kept hammering us on price. One of the things we did to try and mitigate that situation was we came out with a soda line, which we still do today, and we had Stone Cat as well, trying to develop our own brands to make it so that we weren't so reliant on some other company that didn't necessarily have our best interests in mind. Fast forward to 2003, right around the holiday time, we got our price increase for grain, and I just couldn't hold the price line anymore. And I suggested to U.S. Beverage that, I needed to increase the prices by 10%, but I would give back 3% of that if they would give me a right of first refusal to buy the Ipswich Ale brand back. They said they don't do rights of first refusal, which is curious because that's how they got it in the first place. They had a right of first refusal to buy it. But they came back and said, make us an offer. I knew what they were into it for.
Okay.
So I offered less.
Otherwise it might be
they came back with what they were into it for.
Right.
So I offered more than the less that I had offered before, and ultimately we ended up buying it back for what they were into it for.
Okay.
So we bought Ipswich Ale back in April of 2003.
How many contracts had you picked up beyond your own brand at that point, though?
At that point, we were brewing Farmington River out of Connecticut. And I believe at that point we may have been brewing Cisco at that point.
Oh, really? That far back you've been working with Cisco?
We've been working with Cisco for a long time. I think we were doing just draft Whale's Tail at that point in time.
Okay, interesting. And then over the years you've added more contracts just periodically, or how have you gone about adding the contracts?
Contracts, it's never been something that I've gone out and solicited. We've added them as they've appeared. There have been some that have come, some that have gone. It's always a bit of a revolving door. Over the past 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years, we've really gotten to be known as the go-to place for small contracts. So now we're at a point now where we actually turn people away.
I'm part of that, I'm guessing, which
You are-
Cisco that you just mentioned as well. I mean, what were they producing with you initially, when they first started getting going?
Cisco, they were doing just half barrels of whale's tail, and I can't even remember, honestly. It wasn't a big volume, and slowly we took on the 6-pack whale's tail, and then additional styles, and now, as you know, we do a lot of volume for them.
Well, you were doing the brewing back in the mid-90s. Tell me a little bit about the evolution of the brewing here, and how many head brewers have you had, and how has been managing that end of the business for you?
Well, the brewing here, just before I started here, they were still brewing on a 7-barrel system. That 7-barrel system was decommissioned maybe 3 months before I showed up, and they commissioned the 30-barrel system. The 7-barrel system, interestingly, went to Cisco Brewers.
Okay.
So we have a very long relationship with Cisco, be it selling equipment back and forth or working together collaboratively on their products and other projects. We went into the 30-barrel brew house, and that really shortened the time frame on what a brew would take. To fill one of the bigger tanks that we have, they were brewing 7 straight brews on the 7-barrel brew house, where we could accomplish that in 2 brews. So that really changed things around. We, back then, really only did Ipswich Ale. We didn't do any contract brewing through the mid-90s. I thought that it was a good way to go. The other owners didn't. They also, I don't believe, exploited the soda opportunity. There were a lot of opportunities to go out there and make beverages. I think one of the things that may be different about myself versus some other brewery owners is we're a beverage company. We're not just necessarily a brewery. If we can make soda and put it out there and build a brand that way, the money that comes in off of that is just as important as the beer brewed money, and it enables us to do other things.
So how many, you've just had a few brewers, is that right? You brewed, Jim, did you brew at one point here?
Jim was the head brewer.
I was head brewer here for about 10 years, so.
Yep.
There you go.
There
and
he
then,
is.
was it Jim, say hi?
Hello?
He's actually now the office manager, master of chaos, helps me out tremendously, thank you. So you, Jim, was there anyone in between?
There was Jeff Gendro. He was the head brewer when I went on full time here. When I started getting paid here, I stopped brewing. I ended up on a truck doing route deliveries.
Okay.
So it was a different avenue that I went. I ultimately was director of operations.
Gotcha.
So we had Jeff Gendro when I started. Then Jim, after all the layoffs, he was the first employee that the old owners hired back after the layoffs before I bought the brewery.
Gotcha.
And now we have Dan Lipke. So it's head brewer wise, there have only been a few.
Now, how long has Dan been here?
Dan's been here 6 years, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
6.
And how did you end up with Dan?
Dan's wife worked here when she was in college back in the mid-90s. And they met up at University of Vermont, and Dan was a brewer up there. And one thing led to another, and she contacted me when I owned the brewery, asking if we were looking for anybody, and I was, and it worked out really great. We'd have a real difficult time doing what we do without him.
What are some of the things you feel he brings to the table that make him a good fit? Because this is a pretty unique brewery in how it functions.
Dan, first and foremost, has a great understanding of beer and is an extremely talented designer of beer. That's number one. Number two, and not far at all behind number one, he's extremely organized, and he's able to juggle what would seem like an impossible brew schedule. We daily change our brew schedule to accommodate different contracts that may have an emergency, may not have an emergency, may not have the order that they projected, and we're constantly moving that around, and Dan does a real great job dealing with the stress of that.